I had sat with more dying men than I could name, and I had never once been paid for it. That is the first thing to understand about the camp at Deep Cut, and about me, and about the machine we broke open in the cold under the ridge. On the Cethari books I was a term hand indenture number 419, working off a passage debt that had been sold twice before it reached me and had grown a little each time it changed hands, the way debts do among people who live long enough to be patient about interest. I hauled tailings. I shored cuts. And at night, when the horn had blown and the day hands had gone to the long sheds to sleep, I sat up with whoever was dying. There was always someone. Deep Cut took the lung. The dust down in the deep cuts was fine as flour and sharp as ground glass, and it went into a man and stayed, and after a few seasons it stood in his chest like wet sand, and then he could not lie flat without drowning slow, and then he sat up through his last nights fighting for every breath until the fighting stopped. The Cethari had a shed for such men, off at the edge of the camp where the smell would not trouble the overseers, and it was understood that once you went into that shed you did not come out of it walking. It was called the still shed, because the men in it went still. I was the one who sat with them, not by any order. There was no line on the ledger for it, no token, no reduction against my debt. I did it because a man ought not to go out of this life alone in the dark with strangers stepping over him, and because I had learned young that the last thing a dying man wants is not medicine. There was no medicine, but a hand and a voice, and someone to stay until the end so that the going is witnessed, so that it counts as something, so that a life closes with another life beside it, and not with an empty room. I gave my sleep to it. That is the plain accounting. A term hand at Deep Cut was allowed 6 hours rest between horns, and I spent 2 or 3 of them most nights in the still shed, and then I went and hauled tailings on 4 hours sleep, and my body paid for it the way bodies do. I was not young. My hands had gone to knots. But I had made a kind of arithmetic with myself long before I came to that world, and the arithmetic held. The hours were mine to spend, and I would rather spend them on a man's last night than on my own rest, because he had fewer of them left than I did, and the difference mattered. The Cethari did not understand this and did not try to. They were a long-lived people, 300-400 of our years, some of them, and they carried themselves like it, unhurried, exact, a race of clerks and owners who had made a whole civilization out of the patience that long life gives you. To them time was the one true currency, and they spent it as carefully as misers, and they could not conceive of a creature giving it away. When Overseer Veshkaram first saw my rest hours logged as unaccounted absences, he had me brought to his office and asked me, in his flat, unhurried trade, what I was buying with them. "Nothing," I said. "I sit with the dying." He looked at me a long moment with those still amber eyes they have, and then he made a small notation, and I understood later that he had marked the hours as idleness, as labor owed and not rendered, and added their value to my debt. In his accounting I was not giving my time away. I was stealing it from him and wasting it, and a wasted hour was a debt, and a debt had to be paid. I did not argue. There was no arguing with a Cethari about time. It was the ground they stood on. So I was, on the books, a debtor, and my debt grew, and I sat with the dying, and that was the shape of my life at Deep Cut in the season we cut down through the ridge and came into the chamber where the engine waited. We were not looking for it. We were cutting a drainage shaft to bleed off the meltwater that came down through the deep workings in the thaw, and the shaft ran into rock that was not rock. A smooth, dark shell, curved, that turned the cutting heads and threw sparks and would not be broken by any pressure the Cethari brought against it, and they brought a great deal. It took them 40 days to open a way through, and they did it in the end not by breaking the shell but by finding a seam in it, a hairline where 2 ancient plates had been joined, and cutting patiently along the seam until a section of it came free and fell inward into the dark, and cold air breathed out of the hole, air that had not moved in longer than the Cethari kept records, and they keep records for a very long time. I was on the shoring crew that went down first, because you always send the debtors and the term hands into a new dark, before you send anything you have to pay for. I remember the moment my lamp cleared the broken shell and the beam went out into the chamber and found nothing, and kept going and found nothing. And I understood that the space in front of me was enormous, that we had cut into the top of something the size of a cathedral, and that the floor of it was far below, and that the whole vast dark of it was full of the engine. I will do my best to say what it was, though I have never had the words for it, and I do not think I was meant to. It filled the chamber the way a heart fills a chest. Rings within rings within rings, hundreds of them, thousands, each a great hoop of dark metal standing on its edge, all of them nested and interlocked and hung about a single still center, and between the rings and around them and threaded all through the vast dim volume of the place, there was a lattice filaments finer than hair, dark, strung in their millions from ring to ring, and the whole of it silent and lightless and cold, a machine the size of a hill that had stopped. It did not look broken. It looked like a thing that had chosen to be still, the way the men in the still shed went still, and was waiting, patient as the Sethari but older, for some reason to move again. The Sethari came down after we had shored the way and made it safe, and they walked the gantries we hung, and they measured it and lit it and put their instruments against it, and they could make nothing of it. It answered nothing. It drew no power they could offer and gave off none they could read. For all the mass of it, all the impossible fineness of it, it registered to their machines as dead, inert, a monument, a tomb work of some people who had died out of the galaxy so long ago that even the Sethari had no name for them, only a catalog number. And a dead machine to the Sethari was one thing and one thing only. It was salvage. Veshkaram came down himself, which he did not often do, and he stood on the lowest gantry looking at the great still rings, and I was near him because I was on the crew that held the lamps for the survey, and I heard him give the order in his flat, unhurried voice. Cut it up. Weigh the metal. The alloy of the shell alone was worth more than the whole season's ore, and the rings would be worth more than that, and the fine latticework would be swept up and smelted for whatever it was, and the chamber would be emptied, and the engine that had waited in the dark through ages would go out of the world in ingots. He set it for the next thaw. He gave the still work a term of days. And he went back up, and the great machine stood in our lamplight not knowing, or not seeming to know, that it had been sentenced, the way the men in the still shed did not always know. That is where it stood, condemned scrap, and me a debtor holding a lamp beside it, the night they brought the boy down. His name was Wren. He was one of the young term hands, 17, 18, come out on the same passage scheme that had taken me, sold the same lie about working the debt clear in 5 years and going home with wages. He had the lung. He had had it a season and hidden it, the way they do when they are young and afraid of the still shed, coughing into his sleeve on the far side of the sheds where the gang boss would not hear. And by the time it could not be hidden, it was far along, and by the night I am telling of it was nearly done with him. They did not bring him to the still shed. The still shed was full. It was a bad season for the lung, and there was a foolish notion among the day hands that the deep chamber was cold and clean, and that the cold was good for the breathing, and so someone had the idea to lay the worst of the sick down on pallets on the lowest gantry, in the cold breath of the great engine, where at least the air did not have the dust in it. It was not good for the breathing. Nothing was good for the breathing by then. But it was quiet down there, and it was out of the way, and so that is where Wren was when his last night came, and that is where I went to sit with him. Because word had reached me at the end of my shift that there was a boy dying at the foot of the machine and no one with him, and I still had 3 hours before the horn. I went down. The survey lamps were doused, only the safety lights burned, small and red along the gantries, so that the great engine was a mountain of darkness with a few red stars strung on it, and the cold came up off it like the cold off deep water. Wren was on a pallet with his back against a stanchion, sitting up because he could not lie down, and he was drowning in the slow way, each breath a labor, and his eyes were wide and frightened in the red light. I sat down beside him on the cold plate of the gantry and I took his hand and I said the things you say. That I was here, that I would stay, that he did not have to talk, that he was not alone. He had a little water in a tin and it was gone, and he was fevered and thirsty in the way the dying often are at the end, and so I gave him mine. I had my nitration, a half measure, and I held it to his mouth and let him drink it in sips over the hours, all of it, and I went thirsty, and that was nothing, that was an easy thing to give. And I gave him my 3 hours. The horn blew far up above us for the start of the shift, muffled by all that rock and the vast dark shell, and I did not go up. I stayed. I would haul tailings on no sleep at all, and I would be marked absent, and my debt would grow, and Wren would not die alone at the foot of a dead machine in the cold and the red dark. That was the arithmetic. It held. He went out a little before what would have been dawn if there were dawn down there. It was quiet at the end, the way it sometimes is when a man has stopped fighting the thing and let it take him. The breaths came slower and further apart, and I held his hand and told him it was all right to go, that he had done nothing wrong, that going was not a failing, and on one of the long spaces between breaths there simply was not another one. I sat with him a while after. You always do. You do not get up the moment it is done, as though you had been waiting for a horn. You sit, and you let the quiet be, and you let the life that has just ended be witnessed in the stillness, because that is the last thing you can give, and it costs you nothing but time, and time was the thing I had made up my mind long ago to spend this way. And it was in that quiet, with the boy's hand cooling in mine and the great dead engine hanging over us in the dark, that the first light came. I thought at first it was my eyes. A man's eyes make lights in the dark when he has not slept, sparks and swimming motes, and I had not slept, and I had been thirsty, and I had just watched a boy die. But this light did not swim and did not fade. It was a single point deep in the lattice of the engine, one filament out of the millions lit from within by a mote of pale gold, small as a grain, steady. It had not been there before. I would have sworn it had not been there. And as I watched it, a second one lit near it, and then a third, and I understood, the way you understand a thing before you have any right to, that the machine was not dead, that it had never been dead, that it had been still the way the men in the still shed were still, waiting, patient for a reason, and that something had just given it one. I did not tell the Sethari. I want that set down plainly, because a great deal followed from it, and I have gone over it many times in the years since. When I climbed up out of the chamber that morning, gray with no sleep and marked absent on the ledger and carrying the small grief you carry after every one of them, I said nothing about the light. I told myself it was because they would not believe me, and that was true. I told myself it was because it was not their business, and that was closer to true. But the truest thing, the thing I did not admit to myself until much later, was that I did not want them to have it. I did not want Veshkaram's cold instruments against that small gold light. I had sat all night at the foot of the thing while a boy died, and the light had come, and it felt like something between the machine and me and Wren, and I did not want it weighed and catalogued and cut up for the price of the metal. So I held my tongue, and I went and hauled tailings, and I did not sleep, and I was marked a debtor for the hours I had spent, and Veshkaram added their value to my passage debt as he always did, in his neat, unhurried hand. But I went back the next night. Of course I went back. There were more of the sick down there now. They kept bringing them. The cold was quiet. The still shed was full, and there was always one near the end, and so I had reason to be at the foot of the engine, and I took my reasons, and I went down after my shift, and I sat where I had sat. And the machine had more lights in it than the night before. Not a great many. 12, 2 dozen, scattered through the lattice, small and gold and steady. And as I sat there through the night with a dying woman's hand in mine, her name was Marta, dust-lung, 40 perhaps, she had been strong once, I watched, and when Marta went out near morning, and I sat with her afterward in the quiet the way I always did, another light came. It lit as her breathing stopped, one filament, one mote, deep in the machine, as though the engine had reached out into the dark and caught something as it left her and kept it. I understood then what it was doing, or I began to. It was not measuring the deaths. It was measuring me. Every light that lit came on a night I sat. In the hour after I had given something away, my water, my sleep, my 3 hours that were mine to keep and did not. And I began to see, over the nights that followed, that the lights were not scattered at random through the lattice but were filling it in a shape, spreading out from the point where I sat, ring by ring, as though the machine were reading back through some record I did not know I had made and lighting a mote for every hour of it. And there were a great many hours. That was the thing that frightened me when I let myself look at it. Night after night the lights spread and did not stop and did not slow, hundreds of them, now thousands, climbing the great rings toward the still center, and I understood that whatever the engine was counting, it was counting a very long tally, longer than the season, longer than my time at Deep Cut. It was counting all of them. Every dying man I had ever sat with, on that world and on the two before it and back through the whole gray length of my life. Every hour I had ever taken from my own rest and my own comfort and my own keeping and given to someone who was leaving. The machine had found the record of it somewhere in me, in the shape of me. I do not know, and it was lighting a star for each one. And the tally ran up through the rings like a slow tide of gold, and it was enormous. I told no one. But the Sethari have their own instruments, and the thaw was coming. And the day the salvage crews came down to begin the cutting was the day the machine could no longer be hidden. They came with the great cutting heads on gantry cranes and a full survey team and Vesh Karam himself, and they lit the chamber up with the hard white survey lamps, and in that flat white light you could not see the small gold motes at all. They were drowned in it, invisible, and I felt a kind of animal fear at that they would begin to cut and never know the thing was full of lights. The head of the salvage crew set the first cutting head against the outermost ring, low down near the gantry, near where I had sat, and gave the order, and the cutting head bit into the ancient metal with a scream, and the machine woke. It did not wake the way a machine wakes. There was no roar of power, no blaze. It was quieter and far worse. The scream of the cutting head simply stopped, not because it was switched off but because it met something and could not go on, and every hard white survey lamp in the chamber went dark at once, all together, and in the darkness the whole engine was full of gold. Not the scattered motes now, all of it. Every filament of the vast lattice lit from within, millions upon millions of them, and the great rings turning. I had not seen them move before. They had stood still through the whole dig. And now they were turning, slow and enormous and silent, ring within ring within ring, and the light of them filled the chamber like the light of a low sun, gold and warm and old, and it fell on the upturned faces of the Sethari salvage crew and the survey team and Vesh Karam. And I saw on those long, patient faces a thing I had never once seen a Sethari wear. I saw awe. I saw them stunned, mouths a little open, hands lifting toward the light, backing against the gantry rails. An ancient, unhurried people who thought they knew the price of everything, looking up at a thing they could not price and did not understand. And the machine looked for me. I felt it before I understood it. The turning of the rings changed. I cannot say how I knew, but the vast slow motion of the whole engine was orienting, the way a face turns, and it was turning toward the lowest gantry, toward the cold plate near the stanchion where I had sat through so many nights, where I was standing now among the crew with a lamp gone dark in my hand. The gold light gathered. The center of it, the still heart of all the rings that had never moved, brightened and brightened until it was too bright to look at, and out of that brightness came a voice, though voice is not the word. It was in the light. It was in the turning of the rings. It was in the plate of the gantry under my feet and in the cold air and in the bones of my chest, and it spoke in no language and in every language, and I understood it the way you understand your own thoughts, and what it said was, "Bearer of the unspent hours." The rings turned it toward me. The whole engine, the mountain of gold light, named me and turned to me, and the Sethari on the gantries turned too, their stunned faces coming around to find who the machine had spoken to, and they found me, 419, the debtor, the term hand with the dark lamp, the old man who sat with the dying and was marked idle for it, and I stood in the gold light with no words in me at all. It spoke again, and this time I understood more, because it had opened whatever way it needed between us, and the understanding came flooding. It told me what it was. It had been made. I felt the age of the making like a weight, an age beside which the long-lived Sethari were children, an age beside which the dust of Deepcut was young, by a people who were gone now, gone so wholly that not even a name of them remained, only this. And it had been made for one purpose, and it had kept that purpose through all the ages of its stillness, waiting. It was a keeper of hours. Not the hours of the clock, the other hours, the ones that do not show on any ledger. When a creature takes an hour that is its own, an hour of its own short allotted life, its own rest or comfort or safety or time, and gives that hour to another who is in need, spends it not on itself, but on someone leaving, someone suffering, someone alone, that hour does not vanish. The makers had learned, in whatever long wisdom killed them or outlived them, that such an hour is the truest thing a living creature can make, the one act that runs against the whole current of a self trying to keep itself, and they had built this engine to catch those hours and hold them. Everyone. Across all the worlds its reach could touch, across all the ages of its waiting, it had caught the unspent hours of the living, the hours given away, and it held them in its lattice as motes of gold, a treasury not of metal but of given time, waiting for the givers, so that what was given freely might one day be given back. And it had been reading me. Since the night I sat with Ren at its foot and gave him my water and my 3 hours and my thirst, it had found in me the record of a life spent this way, and it had counted. Every night, every hour. All the dying I had ever sat with, all the sleep I had traded, all the small, unremembered givings of a gray, unremarkable life. It had counted them into the lattice, and the tally had climbed the great rings, and now it turned to me and it told me the sum, and the sum is the thing I will carry to my own still night, whenever it comes. It told me that in all the ages of its keeping, across all the worlds and all the peoples it had ever measured, and it had measured the long-lived and the wise, the great old careful races that counted their centuries and spent them well, it had never held from any single creature a tally like mine. Not because I was great. I was not great. I was a debtor hauling tailings on a cold world. But I was human, and that, the engine made me understand, was the whole of it. The long-lived give too. It let me feel that it was not scorning them. The Sethari and the older races gave their hours to one another, tended their sick, sat sometimes with their dying. But a Sethari who gives an hour gives it out of 400 years, and the hour is a small coin from a deep purse, and the giving costs them little, and so their tallies were modest, careful, the givings of the comfortable. We were not comfortable. We lived 40 years, 60, 80 if the world was kind, and it was almost never kind, and every hour we gave away we gave out of that short measure, out of the little we had, knowing, even when we did not let ourselves think it, how little there was, and we gave it anyway, constantly. Without ledger, without token, without any engine to catch it, in the dark of a still shed for nothing, an old man to a dying boy, over and over, world after world, a whole short-lived species pouring out its little hours on one another as though there were no end of them, when we of all the peoples in the dark knew best that there was an end, and that it was near. That was the tally the engine held. Not mine alone, mine was only the record it had happened to read, the door it had happened to open. Behind mine it had felt the rest of us, all of us, every human hand ever laid on a dying stranger, and it had understood at last, after all its ages of keeping, that of everything living it had ever measured, the short-lived thing from the small blue world gave the largest share of the little it was given, and gave it soonest, and gave it for nothing, and did not stop. Bearer of the unspent hours, it named me, not because the hours were unspent, but because I had spent them and it had kept them, and now it meant to give them back. That was the offer. I felt it as clearly as I have ever felt anything. The engine had my hours, all of them, the whole climbing gold tally through all its rings, and it could return them to me, pour them back into the measure of my life, hour for hour, all the time I had ever given away restored to me to keep. It was a great deal of time. It was years. It was the years of sleep I had traded, the years of comfort I had spent, all of it, gathered and given back a long second life. And health in it, the machine let me understand. The knots taken out of my hands and the gray taken out of me and the debt struck from any ledger that could hold it. And time, all the moments I had never lived because I had spent them on the leaving instead of on myself. It offered me my unlived life. It held it out to me in gold light, in front of the stunned, upturned faces of the people who had marked me a debtor, and it waited, patient as its makers, for me to take it. I have thought about that offer every day of my life since. I do not want to pretend I did not want it. I was old and my hands hurt and I was tired in a way that sleep had stopped mending years before, and there is not a man alive who would not feel the pull of it. The years held out, the second life, the moments never lived laid back into your open hand. I felt it. I stood in the gold light and I felt the whole weight of everything I had spent, and I felt how it would be to have it back, and God help me, I wanted it. But I was standing on the plate where Wren had died, and where Marta had died. And I turned my head, and up along the higher gantries in the gold light I could see the pallets, the ones they had brought down that day and the day before, the sick laid out in the cold, the worst of them near the end, sitting up because they could not lie down, drowning slow, and I knew there was one up there who would go out that night or the next, alone if I did not climb up to him, and one behind him, and one behind that one, more than I could ever sit with, more than any one man's hours could cover. A whole camp of the leaving on a cold world at the edge of nowhere. And I understood, standing there with my unlived life held out to me in gold, that I did not want it, that I had never, in all my arithmetic, been keeping a balance to be repaid, that the giving had not been a loan. So I asked the engine for something else. I did not know if it could be done. It was not what the engine was for. It was made to return the hours to the one who gave them. That was its whole purpose across all its ages, the treasury given back to the treasurer. But I asked it anyway, because I had learned long ago that you ask for the dying even when there is no line on the ledger for it. I asked it not to give my hours to me. I asked it to give them to them. To the sick on the pallets and the men in the still shed, and every dying hand in that camp who had run out of time too soon out of the little they were given, to pour my tally into them instead, hour for hour, so that the boy near the end up on the high gantry might have another year, and the one behind him another, and so that no one down there in the cold need drown before his measure was even half spent, need go out at 17 with the debt still on the books and the wages never paid. Give it to them, I asked the machine. I have no use for it that would be worth that. Give it to the ones who are leaving. Let that be what it was for. The great rings were still a long moment. The gold light held, and I felt the engine consider it, felt, across whatever gulf its makers had bridged to build it, an old, vast, patient thing turning over a request it had waited an age to be able to answer and had never once been asked. It was not made to do what I asked, but it had been made by people who understood the unspent hour, who had built a whole engine to honor the one act that runs against the current of a self keeping itself. And here was that act again, the last and largest turn of it. The giver asked for his hoard back and giving it away a second time before it had even warmed his hand. I think that was the thing it had truly been waiting for. Not a giver to repay. A giver who, repaid, would give again. I think in all its ages I was the first, or one of the few, and I think it had begun to move, that first night at Wren's death, because it had felt one coming at last. The rings turned. The gold light gathered, and then it did not come toward me, it went up. It rose through the great engine and out along the gantries, filament by filament, mote by mote, a slow tide of gold climbing to where the pallets were, and I watched it reach the sick in the cold, and I watched, I will swear to this before anything that ever asks me, I watched a boy on a high pallet who had been sitting up drowning take a breath. A full breath. A deep, whole, easy breath, the kind he had not drawn in a season, and then another, and I heard, up in the gold light, a sound I had never once heard in that chamber or in the still shed or in all my nights of sitting with the leaving. I heard someone weeping who was not going to die. And then another. The tide of gold went up through the pallets, and the drowning breaths came clear one after another. And the hours I had spent across a whole gray life poured out of the engine and into the short measures of the dying and lengthened them. And the camp at the foot of the machine filled with the sound of people breathing who had been leaving and now were not. Veshkaram never cut the engine. There was no cutting it after that. It was awake, and it would not answer the salvage heads any more than it had answered the survey instruments. And in the end the Sethari, who are patient, and who know the value of a thing they cannot price even when they cannot say what it is, sealed the chamber and let it be, and posted a mark on their long records that Deep Cut held something not for salvage, and moved their books along. My debt they could not find. It had been struck from every ledger that could hold it, the engine's last small courtesy, and though Veshkaram searched his neat columns for it with something in his amber eyes I had never seen there before, 419 was clear, and I was, on no books at all, a free man. I did not leave. Where would I have gone? The camp was full of the living now, boys who should have died breathing easy, men with the lungs stopped in them who had another 20 years, and I was old and my hands still hurt. The engine had given none of it to me, and I had not asked it to. I stayed on at Deep Cut as a free hand, and I did the work I had always done. There were still dying. Not the lung so much after that season, but a camp on a cold world is never done with the dying, and there was always, some nights, a man at the end who should not be alone in the dark, and I still had my hours, the ordinary ones, the ones no engine catches, and I still spent them the same way. I sat with the leaving. I gave my sleep. It was the only arithmetic I had ever known, and the machine under the ridge had not changed it. It had only once let me see the sum, and then let me give the sum away, and I was grateful past any saying that it had let me give it and not made me keep it. I am an old man now, older than I ever thought a term hand would get to be, and I do not have many hours left of my own, and I know it, the way you come to know it. And I have thought more than once that when my own still night comes I would like it to come down there in the cold chamber, at the foot of the great engine, on the plate where Wren died, and where the light first found me. I would like to sit down there with my back against the stanchion and let the last of my hours go out one at a time, and I do not think I would be afraid, because I know now what happens to an hour given away. I have seen where it goes. It does not vanish. Somewhere in the dark there is a machine older than the Sethari, older than names, full of gold light, that caught every hour I ever spent on someone leaving and would have given them all back to me. And I told it no, give them to the dying, and it did. That is the whole of it. I sat with more men than I could name, and I was never paid for it, and I was marked a debtor for it on every ledger the long-lived keep. But there was one reckoning I had not counted on, kept by a people so old their name is gone, and by that reckoning I owed nothing, and never had, and was owed instead more time than a short life could hold. And when it was held out to me, all the hours, all the moments I never lived, I gave them away again, to the leaving in the cold at the foot of the engine, and I have never once been sorry, and I would not take a single one of them back. Let the Sethari keep their ledgers. I know what an hour is worth. I have seen it spent, and I have seen it kept, and I have seen it given away twice, and I tell you there is no coin in the long dark to match it. We are a short-lived people. We of all the peoples out here know best how little we are given, and we give it away anyway, in still sheds and cold chambers and the dark at the end of a stranger's night, for nothing, and do not stop. The engine knew. It waited an age to find one of us, and then it named me, and I have carried the name ever since, and I will carry it down into my own still night when it comes. Not a debtor, never that. Bearer of the unspent hours,